I remember the scent before the sight, that dense mixture of coal, wet stone and iron that never leaves you once it settles into your lungs. London has always smelled like something half alive and half decaying, as if the whole city were rotting from the inside but refusing to die. Even now, all these years later, the smell lingers in me. It is the perfume of my becoming. In those days, I lived behind the tailor's shop on Bishopsgate Street, where the fog never lifted and the windows were always sweating with condensation. Every morning, before the gas lamps dimmed, I would step outside with a bucket and listen. The world had not yet awakened, but it breathed, in the creak of shutters, the distant clatter of carriage wheels, the cough of a watchman hidden somewhere in the mist. London was never quiet. Even its silence had a pulse. The pavements gleamed with last night's rain. I could see the reflection of the lamplight quivering like a nervous star in the puddles. Stray dogs nosed through piles of refuse. Rats moved in confident lines, bold as merchants. The air was thick enough to taste, smoky and metallic, as though the factories were exhaling straight into my throat. I used to think that the city was merely loud. Now I know it was speaking, and that I was the only one who truly listened. Inside the shop, the world became small again. Bolts of fabric lined the walls like patient soldiers waiting to be cut down. The scissors rested where they always did, gleaming with discipline. I took comfort in their precision, their obedience to my hand. Every snip felt like control, a clean, perfect decision in a world where nothing else was ever clean. Customers came and went in their silent parades, the butcher's wife with her trembling chin, the banker with the gold chain that glinted like arrogance, the pale widow who smelled of lilac and loss. I stitched their grief and vanity into their clothes, each thread a small betrayal of what they really were, and yet none of them saw me. To them I was only the tailor, a pair of hands, a faint nod behind a counter, invisible, necessary, forgettable. That was the beauty of my trade. No one looks long at a man who serves them. I remember her most clearly, the widow in black silk. She entered on a morning that seemed carved from ash. The bell above the door gave a small cry, and there she was, veiled, pale, her eyes glimmering faintly beneath the lace. "I need a dress," she said, "for mourning." Her voice wavered like a candle. I asked the usual questions. Cut, length, fabric. She barely listened. "It must be beautiful," she said at last. "Beautiful enough to honor the dead." When I began to cut the silk, my hand slipped. The blades kissed my thumb, and a drop of blood fell onto the fabric. Bright, red, perfect. She leaned forward, fascinated. "It looks alive," she whispered. I smiled then, though I don't know why. Perhaps because for the first time someone had seen what I saw. That blood in its stillness holds more truth than words ever can. That night I dreamed of the drops spreading through the silk, blooming wider and wider until it drowned the city. The streets were rivers of scarlet, the rooftops wept. When I woke, I could still feel the dampness on my hands. Days in London blurred into one another like stains in rainwater. The city moved in grey tones, smoke, shadow, sorrow. Even the air seemed to have forgotten colour. Every afternoon I would walk through the alleys behind Bishopsgate, where the market refuse rotted in piles and the gutters choked on bones. Children chased one another through the muck, their laughter sharp as glass. The vendors shouted until their voices cracked. "Hot pies! Warm gin! Candles cheap!" And their words dissolved into the endless coughing of the crowd. Sometimes, when the noise became too much, I slipped into quieter streets, narrow veins between the city's beating organs. The fog was heavier there, and the gaslights burned lower, as if exhausted. I would listen to my footsteps echo between the walls, and imagine that the sound belonged to someone else, following me. The air carried a taste of iron that clung to my tongue. I found myself wondering how much of the city's smoke was coal, and how much was human. When I returned to the shop, everything felt different. The scissors seemed to watch me. I kept them polished, oiled, immaculate, more out of reverence than need. I began to dream of their sound when I wasn't working. Snip, snip, snip. Sometimes I thought I heard it in the streets, carried by the wind. The widow returned 2 weeks later. Her veil fluttered as she stepped inside, and for a moment it looked as if the fog had followed her in. "You cut so cleanly," she said, tracing a finger along the edge of my scissors, "almost too cleanly." Her voice lingered in the room even after she left, like perfume trapped in a coffin. That night the rain began again, soft at first, then furious. I sat by the window, watching it streak the glass in crooked lines. Each drop caught the lamplight, trembling before vanishing into the dark. The street outside was empty, but I imagined footsteps beneath the sound of the rain. Steady, measured, deliberate. My hands ached to hold the scissors. The city outside seemed to pulse with something unseen. In every shadow, I thought I saw a shape, a movement just beyond the edge of knowing. The butcher's shop across the street was closed, yet the smell of meat still drifted through the air, sweet and thick. Somewhere far off a woman screamed, not in terror but in argument, and the sound was swallowed by the fog before it reached its end. I remember thinking that London itself was suffocating. The gas lights hissed, the chimneys spat ash, and still the rain would not stop. It was as if the heavens were trying to wash something away. I did not yet understand that it was me. When I closed the shop that night, the fog was so thick I could hardly see my own hands. I remember the sound first, a wet, heavy cough, then a voice. "Got a coin, tailor?" He stood beneath the lamp, swaying, his coat torn and dripping. The light turned his face into a smear of shadow. I should have locked the door and walked away. Instead, I opened it. "Come in," I said. He laughed as he stumbled through the doorway. The smell of gin and rain filled the room. "Fine place," he said, running a filthy hand across the counter. "You sew for the gentry, don't you? Bet they pay you to lick their boots." I said nothing. The city outside had gone utterly still. No hooves, no cries, no bells, just the distant hiss of the rain. He leaned close enough that I could feel his breath, sour and hot. "Bet they'd pay me to shut your mouth for good." Something in me shifted then. Not anger, but understanding. A tailor knows the strength of fabric by the way it resists the blade. I wondered briefly how flesh would respond. I reached for the scissors. The blades met his throat before I felt the decision form in my mind. It was not fury that guided me. It was precision, the same movement I had practiced 1,000 times in cloth. The sound was soft, almost polite. The man gasped once, the breath leaving his body in a shudder, and then his knees bent as though he were bowing. For a moment, I did not move. The world seemed to slow around me. I could hear the faint crackle of the lamp, the trickle of rain through the gutter outside, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. His eyes were still open, reflecting the flame. I saw myself in them. Calm, composed, unremarkable. Then came the smell, copper and warmth. It filled the room like incense. It was not unpleasant. It was strangely clean. I remember thinking that no fabric ever absorbed color the way flesh did. The scissors trembled in my hand, not from fear, but from awe. Outside, London continued breathing, unaware. The rain struck the windows harder, as if the city itself were knocking. The gaslight flickered, painting the walls in trembling shadows. I looked down at the man on the floor and felt the same quiet satisfaction I had known as a tailor, the satisfaction of completion. I dragged his body into the back room. The wooden boards creaked beneath the weight, the sound rhythmic and familiar, like the treadle of a sewing machine. I wrapped him in canvas, tied it with twine. My hands were steady. Every motion had purpose. When I finished, the bundle looked almost like a roll of fabric waiting to be cut. Cleaning came next. I scrubbed the blood with vinegar and lye, the scent burning my nostrils. The stains disappeared one by one, obedient to my touch. When I was done, I washed my hands in the basin. The water turned pink, then clear. I stood there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the surface. My face looked pale, ordinary, but behind my eyes something had shifted. I carried him out close to midnight. The fog was thick enough to hide an army. It curled around the lampposts like smoke from a dying fire. The streets were nearly empty, only the sound of hooves somewhere in the distance, and the occasional bark of a stray dog. My boots sank into the mud as I walked toward the alley behind the tannery. The air there was sour with chemicals and rot, but it suited the task. I left him beside the river wall, where the Thames swallowed all sins. The water was high and angry, beating itself against the stones. I stood for a moment, watching the current twist around the bundle, the canvas darkening as it sank. The rain came harder, striking my face like needles. On the bridge above, a carriage passed, the lamps glowing through the mist. The driver hummed a tune, a hymn perhaps, and never looked down. The horses' hooves clattered like applause. When the last trace of the bundle vanished beneath the surface, I turned back. My footsteps echoed in the narrow street, slow and even. No one saw me. No one ever does. I walked through the market quarter, past shuttered stalls and carts half covered with tarps. The smell of old fish and spoiled fruit clung to the air. In a doorway, a beggar slept under a torn blanket, snoring softly. I envied him for a moment, that deep, unknowing peace. A cat followed me for several blocks, its eyes gleaming yellow in the dark. When I stopped, it stopped. When I turned, it vanished into the fog. For some reason, that small disappearance unsettled me more than the death behind me. By dawn, the city stirred again. The milkmen called to one another in the distance. A whistle shrieked from a factory yard. I watched the sky pale from grey to bruised blue. The rain had ended, leaving the cobblestones shining like wet glass. I returned to the shop, hung my coat by the door and lit the stove. The warmth crept through the room slowly. I boiled tea, poured it into a chipped cup, and sat by the window. From there, I could see Bishopsgate waking, the first carts rolling out, the first voices calling prices. No one looked toward my door. I half expected the police to appear, or a knock from the widow, or even the whisper of conscience. None came. The silence was deeper than ever. I realized then that silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something greater, something vast and unnameable. The newspapers arrived that afternoon. I read them while hemming a waistcoat for a judge. There was no mention of a body. Instead, a headline spoke of a fire near the docks. 3 homes destroyed. Another announced a new railway proposal. London was already busy forgetting the night before. I smiled as I folded the paper. The city does not notice its own bleeding. It only worries when the blood stains the pavement. That evening I polished the scissors. The lamplight ran along their edge, sharp as moonlight. My reflection stared back, distorted, divided by the blades. I thought of her again, the widow in silk, and of the way her voice had trembled when she said, "It looks alive." Over the next days, I worked as before. Clients came and went, measuring their vanity in inches and coins, but the noise of London grew louder in my ears. Every shout from the market, every hammer from the docks, every church bell, they all pulsed against me like waves. I began to crave the silence again, the quiet after the cut. At night, I walked the streets without purpose. The fog embraced me as one of its own. I passed drunks slumped in doorways, lovers arguing under awnings, constables warming their hands by gas lamps, their faces blurred into the mist. I was a ghost among them, unseen, unremarked. The city's rhythm became my own. The dripping eaves, the rustle of rats in the gutters, the soft thud of boots on wet cobblestones, all of it formed a pattern, a music only I could hear. Sometimes I would stop beneath a lamppost and close my eyes, letting the sound wash through me until I felt weightless. It was in those moments I knew what I had done was not an end, but a beginning. One morning, a boy delivering cloth bolts told me of a corpse found near the river. They say the throat was cut clean, like with a knife, he said, his eyes wide. But the inspector thinks it was shears, like a tailor might use. He laughed nervously, expecting me to join him. I did. Shears, you say? Then perhaps the city's fashion has turned violent. He grinned, relieved, and left. When the door closed, I leaned against it and listened to the fading sound of his steps. Somewhere far off, church bells began to ring for morning prayers. Each chime struck like a blade through the fog. I felt the echo move through me, slow and deliberate. That night, I returned to the bridge. The river had already forgotten the man I gave it, but I had not. The scissors rested inside my coat, their weight comforting. The air smelled of rain again, and the city whispered from every direction. I stood there until the gas lamps burned low, waiting for the silence to speak. And when it finally did, I understood what it wanted. London was not asking to be saved, it was asking to be cut. Morning always comes too late in London. The fog hangs over the rooftops long after dawn, and the sun, if it rises at all, looks sickly and grey. I walked through the market that day as though nothing had changed. My coat was buttoned, my gloves clean, my pace unremarkable. Yet everything around me trembled with a new rhythm, the rhythm of fear. It started with whispers. Two women near the bakery stood with baskets in hand, talking in voices thin as thread. "Down by the river," one said. "They found him with the throat cut clean through." The other crossed herself. "Like a butcher?" "No," the first replied. "Cleaner than that." The words slid past me like smoke. I kept walking. The stalls smelled of wet fruit and horse dung. Vendors called half-heartedly, their shouts weaker than usual. Even the air felt different, tighter, expectant, as though the whole city had taken a breath and forgotten how to let it go. When I passed a newsboy shouting headlines, I stopped to listen. "Murder by the river!" he cried. "Police baffled by mutilation." He waved a damp paper in the air. The ink had bled, blurring the letters. I bought one, though I already knew what it would say. The article was brief. They never waste too much ink on the poor. It described the man found at dawn near the tannery, his throat neatly divided by an implement of industrial sharpness. The police were pursuing leads, but offered no suspects. There was mention of a constable named Reeves, recently transferred from Whitechapel, who had a keen eye for ritual. That was the first time I saw his name, Reeves. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my coat. Around me, London moved slower, each sound sharper, each face more awake. The city was beginning to notice its wound. By afternoon, rain began to fall again, thin, needle-like. The puddles mirrored the gaslights, turning every street into a corridor of fire and mud. I wandered without purpose, passing pubs where the windows glowed with amber light. Inside, men huddled over pints, their talk hushed and feverish. "They say he used scissors," one voice muttered. "Cut him like a tailor would cloth." Another laughed nervously. "Scissors? That's madness." "Maybe not," said a third. "My brother saw the body, said the cut was perfect, straight as a ruler." The laughter died after that. No one wanted to test how perfect. I stood outside, rain dripping from the brim of my hat, listening. Their fear was a soft music, uneven, trembling, but beautiful. Every rumour, every exaggeration was a stitch tightening the pattern. When I finally went inside, I ordered a drink I didn't need and sat in the corner. The men at the bar spoke of little else. Some said the killer was a surgeon, others a butcher, others a demon. No one mentioned a tailor, no one ever does. A man unfolded the latest paper on the counter. The headline screamed louder than the first. "The Scissor Killer strikes in the East End." The words seemed absurd at first. Too dramatic, too cheap. But as I read them, I felt something stir inside me, slow and certain. The Scissor Killer. It was not my name, but it fit like a garment tailored for someone I might become. That night I walked home through the fog. The lamps burned low, their halos soft and trembling. The rain had stopped, but the streets glistened with filth and reflection. Somewhere a violin played, a mournful tune drifting from a tenement window. It reminded me of the shears sliding through silk. In the distance, the bells of St. Paul's began to toll, 11 chimes. Each one lingered, swallowed by the mist. I stopped beneath a bridge arch, listening. The city was restless again. I could feel its pulse under my boots. A constable's whistle sounded somewhere far off, 2 short bursts, sharp and lonely. The sound echoed against the stone walls and vanished. I imagined Reeves hearing it too, somewhere across the river, tracing invisible lines on a map, chasing patterns that led nowhere. For the first time, I wondered what kind of man he was. Did he walk through these same streets, smelling the same rot, hearing the same whispers? Did he feel the city breathing down his neck as I did? Perhaps he did. Perhaps we were 2 lungs in the same diseased body. When I reached my door, I hesitated before unlocking it. The fog behind me thickened, turning the street into a white void. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move within it, tall, deliberate, almost human. Then it was gone. Inside, the room was colder than the air outside. I lit a lamp and stared at my hands. They were clean, too clean. The scissors rested in their box, gleaming like a secret. I touched them lightly, and the echo returned, that faint metallic rhythm that only I could hear. Snip, snip, snip. The papers said the killer struck only once, but I knew better. The first cut was only the pattern. The cloth of the city was vast. There was still so much to trim. I placed the scissors on the table and opened the window. The fog poured in, cold and wet against my face. Somewhere in the distance, someone was crying. A woman, maybe, or the wind pretending to be one. I listened until the sound faded, then closed the shutters. Sleep did not come. It rarely does after creation. The next morning, the city was louder. London has a way of turning fear into noise. Every street seemed to echo with new voices, papers flapping, carts rattling, dogs barking at shadows. The headlines multiplied like flies on meat. "The Scissor Killer strikes again!" they screamed, though there had been no second body yet. Fear doesn't wait for truth. It only needs hunger. I left the shop early. The air smelled of smoke and wet stone. The clouds pressed low as if the sky itself wanted to hide. On the corner, a preacher shouted from a wooden crate. His voice cracked as he waved a tattered Bible. "Judgment walks among us," he cried. "Repent, or the blades will find you." People gathered around him, their faces pale and wet with drizzle. A woman clutched her child to her chest, whispering a prayer. A man spat on the ground and walked away, muttering about devils and whores. I stopped long enough to listen. His words were mad, but not wrong. Judgment had indeed come, only it wasn't divine. It was human. It was me. At the newspaper stand, the seller was already drunk, his fingers black with ink. "3 pennies for the Illustrated Police News," he shouted. "Sketches of the killer's work. Scenes of horror in Bishopsgate." I bought one. The front page showed an artist's drawing, a grotesque invention of what they imagined me to be. A hunched man in a long coat, scissors raised like a weapon, his eyes white and empty. The caption read, "The Tailor of Death." I laughed softly. It was all wrong. They had made me monstrous, and yet I felt strangely flattered. Monsters are remembered. Tailors are not. The days that followed were strange ones. The city grew feverish. Constables patrolled the alleys in pairs, their boots striking the stones like hammers. Lanterns burned all night, but the fog swallowed their light. Shopkeepers bolted their doors early. Women no longer walked alone. The brothels emptied, the taverns filled, and still the whispers grew louder. They began to suspect everyone. The butcher, the barber, the cobbler's apprentice. 2 men were arrested in the East End after being found with knives. The papers called it promising progress. They were released 3 days later when the next corpse appeared. Yes, there was another. A sailor found him floating face down in the Thames near Wapping. the throat cut cleanly, the lips sewn with coarse thread. The article said the stitches were too neat to be rage. I read that line again and again. Too neat to be rage. It pleased me. The papers named me officially after that. The Scissor Killer. The words printed bold and black, framed by drawings of terrified women and policemen with lanterns. I cut the headline out and pinned it behind the counter, hidden beneath a scrap of velvet. Customers never noticed. The fear became its own weather. Everywhere I walked, it followed. A scent, a vibration, a subtle tightening of breath around me. The city's heart raced faster. Conversations stopped when the lamplighters passed. Carriages hurried through puddles. Even the church bells seemed cautious now, their chimes shorter, less certain. One night I wandered into Spitalfields. The market was closing, the stalls half covered with canvas. A few vendors lingered, smoking pipes, their faces dim under the lamps. I bought an apple, just to have a reason to stand among them. "Did you hear?" one man said. "Inspector Reeves is on the case now. They say he worked the Ripper murders." "Aye," said another. "If anyone can find this devil, it's him." The first man snorted. "He won't find nothing. The city protects its own." The others laughed, a sound brittle as glass. I bit into the apple. The flesh snapped, white and wet. Reeves. His name again. I pictured him reading the same headlines I did, tracing the same lines through the fog. The thought both amused and unsettled me. I left before the laughter faded. In the nights that followed, I did not kill. I observed. The city was too alive to cut just yet. I walked its veins, from Whitechapel to Shoreditch, from the wharves to the bridges, and listened to it breathe. The fog hung lower than ever, dense as wool. I could hear everything in it. Footsteps, whispers, the scrape of a blade on stone, the cough of a stranger who never appeared. Sometimes I felt that Reeves was close, not physically, no footsteps behind me, no gloved hand on my shoulder, but present, like a thought that doesn't belong to you. In certain streets, I caught myself looking twice at faces, wondering if one of them was his. I began to imagine conversations that had not yet happened. In those imagined exchanges, he never shouted or accused. He only asked, "Why?" And I would answer, "Because you hear it too." The fog turned to frost as autumn deepened. London glittered faintly under a thin layer of ice. The gutters froze, and the rats grew bolder. At dawn, their squeaks echoed between the walls like laughter. I often stayed awake to hear it. The newspapers kept feeding the hysteria. Some called me a lunatic, others a visionary. A pamphlet sold near the docks claimed I was punishing sinners. I saw one of the brothel girls reading it aloud to her friends, her laughter sharp and bright. They called me the ghost with scissors. If only they knew how close they were. At times I wondered if the city truly wanted me caught. Fear brings business. Papers sold faster. Police earned praise. The church pews filled. Even the taverns profited. London thrives on its monsters. It would never kill the thing that feeds it. Still, Reeves persisted. His name appeared more often now. Inspector Reeves vows to end the terror. Reeves questions local tradesmen. Each article made my pulse quicken. I began to keep the clippings in a drawer. The edges curled from handling. Sometimes, late at night, I would read them aloud, not for pride, but for company. Reeves had become the only voice that spoke directly to me, even when he didn't mean to. The fog thickened again near the year's end. I remember walking along the embankment, the lamps glowing like dying stars. A thin sheet of ice floated on the river, cracking softly with the current. In the distance, a police whistle sounded once, faint as a sigh. I stopped to listen. The wind carried voices, 2 constables, maybe 3. One said, "Reeves thinks he's a tailor. The cuts are too neat." I smiled into the fog. So the hunter was learning my language. The morning after the first killing felt unreal, as if London had woken up under a different sky. The light was the same, grey and hesitant, but the air carried a pulse I hadn't felt before. It was alive, aware, listening. When I stepped out, I felt it move through me, like the faint vibration of strings after a note has been played. The fog clung to my coat as I walked, thick and damp, curling around my legs like smoke from an invisible fire. Somewhere a cart creaked, somewhere a bell rang, somewhere a voice called out for bread. All of it blurred into a hum, a background murmur to the only sound that mattered, the silence I had left behind in that room. People passed me without seeing me. They always did. But now, for the first time, I felt something change in the way they moved. Their eyes darted more quickly, their steps faltered. They didn't know why they were afraid. Fear rarely announces its reason, but it was there, subtle and persistent like a stain in the air. I turned onto Bishopsgate, where the market stalls leaned against one another like weary men. The smell of rotting fruit mixed with smoke and damp wool. Two women stood near a fishmonger's stall, their voices low but sharp. "Did you hear?" one whispered. "By the river, they found a man cut clean through." "God preserve us," the other said, clutching her shawl. "What kind of knife could do that?" They both crossed themselves, eyes wide, and looked around as though the killer might be standing among them. They looked at me for half a second, just long enough for the thought to flicker, and then looked away. I smiled faintly. They were right. Later that morning, I bought a newspaper from a boy, shouting near the corner. His face was red from the cold, his voice hoarse. "Murder at the docks," he cried. "Throat cut. Police baffled." The ink was still wet, smearing my gloves as I read. The article was small, tucked between a story about rising bread prices and an advertisement for tooth powder. It said the police were pursuing leads, that the cut was clean and deliberate, and that the crime had a peculiar artistry. Peculiar artistry. I read the phrase again. It pleased me in a way I couldn't explain. To them it was horror, but to me it was recognition. Someone had finally seen it, not the act, but the precision. They mentioned a new name, Inspector Reeves, recently assigned to the case, known for his keen attention to ritual detail. Ritual, another word that pleased me. They were beginning to build my altar. I folded the paper carefully, almost reverently, and slipped it into my pocket. The fog thickened as I walked, swallowing the street ahead. I could barely see my own hands stretched before me, and yet I felt entirely seen, as though the city itself had opened its eyes and was watching me with a strange, silent affection. That night I couldn't work. The shop sat in darkness, the air heavy with the smell of wool and old dust. I lit a single lamp, enough to watch the shadows breathe on the walls. The scissors lay on the table, polished, waiting. Their reflection caught the light like a pulse. The newspaper rested beside them, folded open to that one sentence, clean and deliberate. I read it again and again, until the words began to fade into meaninglessness. Still, they rang inside me, a hum beneath the ribs. Clean, deliberate. The world had finally given me its vocabulary. I imagined the city talking about me. The murmurs in taverns, the prayers in church pews, the hushed laughter of men pretending not to be afraid. Every whisper was a thread, and I could feel them pulling tighter, weaving something larger. My creation was no longer confined to that single body by the river. It had spread, invisible but alive, stitched into every street and alley. I felt almost holy. I walked again the next morning. The streets were slick with rain, shining like veins. Carriages splashed through puddles, splattering mud across the skirts of hurried women. The air stank of coal and panic. The city was waking, restless, half aware of its wound. At a small cafe near Aldgate, I sat by the window and listened. The men inside spoke over their tea, voices low and eager. "They say it was a razor," one said. "No, a knife." "Not a knife," another interrupted, lowering his voice. "Scissors, that's what they said at the docks. Scissors." The others laughed uneasily. One crossed his arms. "Who kills a man with scissors?" The laughter faded. Their discomfort washed over me like warmth. I realized then that fear isn't noise, it's vibration. You feel it in the bones long before you hear it. Theirs was trembling perfectly in tune. I left without finishing my drink. The fog outside was whiter now, almost luminous. Each breath I took filled me with that strange peace I had felt after the first kill, the silence after the snip. That evening I read the paper again. This time the headline screamed, "The Scissor Killer strikes in the East End." I stared at those words for a long time. The Scissor Killer. How easily they had named me, how quickly they had given form to what even I had not yet fully understood. The title was crude, but it fit. It fit like a garment cut to the measure of something that didn't yet exist. I thought of Reeves again, this man who had not yet seen me but already spoke through the papers. I wondered what his eyes looked like, whether he'd recognize the beauty in what I'd done, or only the ugliness. He was already inside my thoughts, and I was certain that somewhere I was inside his. I placed the newspaper on the floor and stepped on it lightly. The ink bled beneath my heel. The city had written my name, and now I had left my mark upon it. That night I couldn't sleep. The scissors gleamed from their case beside the bed. I could hear the faint hum of the city through the window, the horses, the vendors, the muffled sobs of someone in the alley. Every sound carried an echo, a rhythm, and within that rhythm I could hear myself. London was breathing with me now. I sat up and whispered into the dark, "I am your echo." The words didn't feel like madness. They felt like truth. The days that followed unfolded like a slow fever. The city was restless, and so was I. Every breath I took seemed to draw in the murmurs of London, the footsteps, the gossip, the prayers muttered under breath. I could feel them crawling beneath my skin like threads tightening around the same secret. Fear had become the city's new religion. You could see it in the way people moved, quick glances over the shoulder, footsteps that hurried when the lamps flickered, hands clutching rosaries or the cold brass of pocket knives. But beneath the panic, there was fascination. It glowed faintly in their eyes. Horror and wonder often share the same heartbeat. One morning, as I stepped outside to fetch water, I heard a neighbor speaking to his wife. "They say the killer's a surgeon," he said. "No man without training could cut like that." "Or a tailor," she whispered. He laughed, but not easily. "A tailor, don't be daft." I kept walking, a small smile hidden beneath my collar. It was always amusing to hear how people dressed their fear. Surgeon, butcher, foreigner, ghost. Anything but ordinary. No one imagines the quiet man who fixes their sleeves could be the one who unthreads their souls. The fog was thicker that day, heavier, almost tangible. It moved around my legs as I walked toward the market. The world felt muffled, like a heartbeat under a pillow. The air tasted of iron and soot. Somewhere nearby, church bells began to ring, soft and distant. But even they sounded uncertain, as though hesitant to disturb the silence I had woven into the city. At the corner, a newspaper boy's voice cut through the fog. "Another victim found near Wapping. The Scissor Killer strikes again." I stopped. The boy's face was flushed with cold and excitement. He held up the paper, its edges damp from the mist. I handed him a coin and took one. The article spoke of a man pulled from the river, his throat divided cleanly with surgical precision. They mentioned the same inspector, Reeves, said to be pursuing several promising leads. I felt my pulse slow. I had not killed again. Not yet. It didn't matter. Fear had a way of multiplying even in the absence of action. The echo was alive, feeding itself. That realization filled me with something I hadn't felt before: power without movement. I had become both absence and presence, the unseen hand guiding the city's shiver. I read the article 3 times before folding it carefully. The ink smudged on my fingertips, black lines tracing my skin like veins. Reeves. His name appeared twice. It looked solid, decisive. I wondered what kind of man left such neat letters behind. As the days passed, I began to see his shadow everywhere, not literally, but in the way people spoke. Reeves says the killer leaves no trace. Reeves believes he's educated. Reeves swears he'll catch him. He was becoming my reflection, though we had never met. two craftsmen shaping the same fear. At night, I walked through the alleys near Limehouse, where the fog pooled thickest. The lamps flickered in protest against the damp. Every sound was amplified. The slosh of boots through puddles, the rattle of a carriage over cobblestones, the distant hiss of steam from the riverboats. London had always been loud, but now it felt orchestral, deliberate. Once I heard footsteps behind me, slow, steady, following. I stopped, pretending to examine a poster on a wall. When I turned, there was no one, only fog. Yet my pulse kept time with the imagined tread. Was it him, Reeves, or only the city pacing alongside me, unwilling to be left behind? The next morning, I found a flyer pinned to my shop door. Reward for information. Regarding the recent murders in the East End, Inspector Reeves requests any citizens with knowledge of suspicious persons to report immediately. The edges of the paper fluttered in the breeze, whispering against the wood. I ran my fingers over the letters. They felt embossed, heavy with intent. Inside the shop I tried to work, but my hands would not obey. Every cut I made with the shears sounded too loud, too final. The rhythm of the scissors no longer soothed me. It accused me. Snip, snip, snip. Each sound felt like a question I couldn't answer. I closed early and wandered aimlessly through the streets. The fog had thinned, but the smell of the river was stronger than ever, decay and salt and rust. Children played near the docks, their laughter shrill against the dull air. One of them carried a pair of tin scissors, pretending to cut the mist. The sight froze me. For a moment, I imagined running toward him, seizing the toy, breaking it apart. But the boy turned, saw me watching, and fled. His footsteps vanished into the echoing streets. That night, I dreamt of Reeves for the first time. He stood in a room I didn't recognize, dim, lined with maps and papers. His face was vague, but his presence was sharp, cold as the edge of a blade. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at me, as though reading something written beneath my skin. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "You've made quite the noise for a man who craves silence." I tried to answer, but no sound came. He stepped closer. "Do you hear them?" "The scissors," I whispered. "No," he said, leaning forward until his breath touched my ear. "The city." I woke drenched in sweat, the sound of rain against the window blending with my heartbeat. I rose and crossed to the mirror. My reflection stared back, pale and hollow-eyed. For the first time I felt the faintest tremor of unease. Was I becoming the thing they imagined? Or had I always been this shape, waiting for the name to fit? The next day, the fear deepened. You could see it in every glance, every hurried step. The churches were full again, their doors open like mouths begging for air. Priests spoke of demons, of divine punishment. The pubs stayed open later than ever, filled with men who drank not to forget, but to feel less alone. And me, I moved among them like a ghost wearing my own skin. I listened. I collected their dread the way some men collect coins. Every word about Reeves reached me eventually, how he interviewed barbers, questioned blacksmiths, even tailors. He was searching for the wrong man, yet somehow it felt personal. The net was closing, but I was still outside it, watching. That night, I sat by the window and looked down at the street below. A patrol passed, their lanterns swaying like fireflies in a storm. One of them laughed. The sound carried upward, thin and brittle. I wondered if Reeves laughed too, or if he saved that energy for thinking. The fog returned near midnight. It pressed against the glass, soft but relentless. I opened the window and let it in. The air was cold and wet, filling the room with that familiar scent. Coal, iron, rain. I breathed deeply and closed my eyes. In the distance, faint and rhythmic, I heard it again. Snip, snip, snip. Not in the room, not in the street, but inside the city itself. The sound of London cutting away its illusions, one layer at a time. And I smiled because I knew Reeves could hear it too. Sleep has become a stranger to me. The nights are long now, heavy and thick, like the air before a storm. I lie awake listening to the city breathe, a rhythm uneven, trembling, almost human. Somewhere a carriage wheel slips on the wet cobblestones. Somewhere a door closes. Somewhere someone whispers a name that might be mine. There are moments when I think I can hear Reeves breathing in the dark, though I have never seen his face. It isn't fear that keeps me awake. Not exactly. It is recognition. I know what it feels like to be haunted by an idea. Perhaps he feels it too. Perhaps we haunt each other. The scissors rest beside my bed, silent and closed. Even in the dark I can see their outline, sharp against the faint glow of the dying lamp. They are the only thing that never change, the only thing I trust. Yet lately, when I look at them, I see something else. Not steel, not craftsmanship, but eyes, watching, waiting. The sound returns sometimes, faint, rhythmic, just at the edge of hearing. Snip, snip, snip. It isn't real. I tell myself that, it's only memory. But the echo doesn't fade. It hides. And when it comes back, it's closer. I walked today through Whitechapel, the place where London seems to rot fastest. The air there tastes like rust, like rain and blood and coal all mixed together. The fog was so thick that every figure looked like a ghost, every lamp a fading sun. I heard Reeves's name again. A boy was shouting it from a street corner, selling another paper. Inspector Reeves vows to end the reign of the Scissor Killer. End? The word stuck to my tongue like ash. What would it mean to end? I bought the paper, though I already knew what it would say. It was the same story repeated. Fear, speculation, invention. They had begun describing me with words I barely recognized. Deranged, sadistic, inhuman. It should have angered me, but instead it made me feel detached, as if they were describing someone else. Perhaps they were. I wandered without purpose after that. The streets twisted endlessly, the same alleys repeating themselves in new disguises. London felt smaller now, closer, suffocating. The air hummed faintly beneath my skin, like thread being pulled through cloth. I could not tell whether it was the city or me coming undone. At times I remember things that cannot be mine. Hands not my own, a voice calling from far away, a woman humming a song I do not know but somehow recognize. They come to me in flashes, sharp and bright, like lightning behind the eyes. Once I saw a house in my mind, white walls, a garden of dead roses, a woman standing at the window. I do not know her name. I do not know why she wept. But I know the sound of the scissors was there too, soft and steady, like rain on glass. Maybe memory is a kind of haunting. Maybe I have always been haunted. The nights have changed. The silence is no longer kind. It moves, it breathes, it whispers things I can almost understand. Last night I dreamt of Reeves again, only this time he wasn't hunting me. He was standing in my shop, his back to me, running his fingers along the fabrics. He spoke without turning. "You've cut too much," he said. I tried to answer, but my mouth would not open. He turned then, slowly, and his face was my own. I woke gasping, my throat raw, my hands gripping the sheets as if they might hold me to the world. The lamp was still burning, and the scissors lay open on the table, though I swear I had closed them before I slept. I stared at them for a long time, the reflection of the flame trembling along their edge. When I finally stood, I realized the floor beneath the table was damp. I thought it was spilled water until I saw the faint streaks leading to the door. Rain, I told myself, only rain. Still, I locked the door. The next morning, I tried to work. A merchant came for a fitting, a large man with a laugh too loud for the room. He talked about the killings as I took his measurements. "They say he's clever," he said. "Slips through the fog like smoke. Reeves'll catch him, though. That man's relentless." He smiled, proud of this Reeves he'd never met, proud to believe someone was in control. When I measured his shoulders, I imagined the blade pressing against his neck. The curve was perfect. I wondered what sound he would make when the scissors closed. I finished the fitting quickly and sent him away. His laughter lingered long after he left, bouncing around the room until it turned into something else, a voice that wasn't his anymore. "You've made quite the noise," it said. I spun around, heart pounding. The room was empty. The street outside was silent. The voice had been inside my head, or perhaps it was never mine to begin with. That night I didn't light the lamp. I wanted to see if the dark would swallow the echoes, if silence could smother the sound. It didn't. In the darkness I could feel the room pulsing, breathing with me. The walls seemed closer, the air heavier. I heard the soft scrape of metal against wood, once, twice, then silence. I reached for the scissors on instinct. They were warm. Something moved outside the window, a shifting in the fog. I went to it, pressed my palm against the glass. The mist was thick, but I thought I saw a figure standing across the street, tall, still, his face hidden. For a heartbeat, I thought it was Reeves. When I blinked, he was gone. I stayed there until the window fogged from my breath. The reflection that stared back at me was unfamiliar, hollow-eyed, colorless. The longer I looked, the more it seemed to move, to tilt its head slightly, to smile when I didn't. I touched the glass, the reflection didn't follow. I stepped back and the smile widened. The lamp burst into flame behind me. Not an explosion, just a sudden flare, bright and soundless. The room filled with light for an instant, then went dark again. I stood in the silence, my heart beating too loud, the smell of oil and smoke in the air. When my eyes adjusted, the reflection was gone. But the smile remained, somewhere inside me. Now I understand why Reeves feels so close. He isn't chasing me through the city. He's moving inside me, tracing my thoughts like a tailor marks a pattern. Perhaps he has always been here, waiting to be recognized. Perhaps Reeves isn't a man at all. Perhaps he is the part of me that still remembers what it means to be seen. I've begun to lose track of time. The days fold into one another like cloth on the cutting table, endless, identical, without beginning or end. I wake to the same grey light, the same thin drizzle against the window, the same heartbeat that does not seem entirely my own. Sometimes I think I am still standing by that river, the fog coiling around my legs, the sound of the water whispering like scissors in motion. Other times, I believe I have never left this room at all, that the river runs beneath the floorboards, and that every drop of rain outside is simply its echo. I keep telling myself that Reeves is real, that he exists somewhere beyond the walls, moving through the streets, asking questions, chasing a man whose shadow I inhabit. But then the nights come, and I hear his voice whisper from places no man could reach. "Do you hear me now?" It happens when I close my eyes, sometimes in the space between heartbeats, sometimes in the sigh of the gas lamp before it dies. The tone is calm, deliberate, patient. Not the voice of an enemy, but of something older, something that knows me too well. When I try to speak back, the words don't leave my mouth. They bloom inside my head like ink in water. Yes, I hear you. I've stopped working altogether. The clients stopped coming long ago, though I cannot remember when. Perhaps they still knock, and I simply don't answer. The scissors lie open on the counter, their edges dulling from disuse. The shop smells of mildew and dust. My reflection in the mirror is thinner, smaller. The light bends differently around me. At times I catch myself listening for the footsteps of customers I will never see again. The widow in black silk, the judge with his heavy gold chain, the sailor with his crooked smile. Their faces come and go like dreams, stitched from memory and fog. I wonder if they were ever real, or if I imagined them as companions for the silence. The city outside my window has grown quieter. The fear that once thrived in every corner has turned inward. Even the headlines are softer now, their letters bleeding into one another as though ashamed of what they created. The Scissor Killer has become a ghost story, a bedtime threat whispered to children. But Reeves remains. Every morning his name finds me, in the paper I no longer buy, in the whispers outside my door, in the pulse behind my temples. The world may forget me, but he will not. He is persistence made flesh. The dreams have changed again. I see him clearly now. Not the vague figure from before, but a man of precise shape. His coat is dark, his eyes sharper than any blade I've ever held. He doesn't move quickly. He doesn't need to. When he looks at me, I feel myself unraveling, thread by thread, word by word. He never asks questions anymore, he only watches. Last night, in the dream, he stood at the end of my bed. The lamp flickered between us. He lifted his hand and pointed to the scissors on the table. "They've grown quiet," he said. "Why did you stop listening?" "I didn't," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then you already know what must come next." I woke with my hands around my own throat. The marks were faint, almost tender, like a tailor's chalk line. The city has begun to speak again, but differently now. The fog no longer hides, it reveals. Shapes move inside it. Faces, outlines, gestures that dissolve when I blink. When I walk through the streets, I hear footsteps that match mine exactly, a half-second behind. When I stop, they stop. When I turn, there is only the mist. I've started whispering to the air, not out of madness, but companionship. I tell it about the silence I created, about how beautiful it once was, how perfect. The air listens. It always listens. Sometimes it answers. The voice comes from the walls, from the floorboards, from the space behind the mirror. It isn't always Reeves now. Sometimes it's the widow, her words floating soft and heavy. "It looks alive," she says again. And then laughter, quiet, fragile, almost kind. The laughter doesn't stop when I cover my ears. It only moves closer. Yesterday I found a letter on the counter. No one could have placed it there. The door was locked, the windows sealed. The envelope was pale and unmarked. My name wasn't written, yet I knew it was for me. Inside was a single piece of paper, blank except for one line. "The pattern is not finished." The handwriting was mine. For a long time I stared at the words, waiting for them to change. They didn't. I folded the paper and placed it inside the drawer with the clippings of Reeves. I don't remember saving them, but there they were. Yellowed, curled, smelling faintly of smoke. Each headline a heartbeat, each line a reminder. Inspector Reeves narrows the hunt. Reeves questions local tailor. Reeves, he cuts with purpose. Cuts with purpose. The phrase might as well have been written on my bones. I've begun to see him in the mirror now, not as reflection, as company. When I stand before the glass, I feel him just behind the surface, watching. Sometimes his lips move, though I cannot hear the words. When I lean closer, his eyes shift to mine, and I swear I feel breath against my skin. It isn't fear anymore, it's recognition. We are bound by the same pattern, two halves of the same creation. He hunts what I cannot kill, the part of me that still remembers the sound of mercy. There are moments when I almost thank him for it. The nights have become longer again. The lamplight trembles, the rain returns, the city sighs beneath the weight of its own damp soul. I sit by the window and wait for the fog to speak. It always does. Sometimes I imagine Reeves walking these same streets, alone, listening to the same echoes, feeling the same pull. Perhaps he looks for me not to arrest, but to understand. Perhaps he already does. Last night, as the church bells marked 2 in the morning, I felt him near. The room grew colder, the air still. Then came the sound, faint, rhythmic, inevitable. Snip, snip, snip. But it wasn't outside. It wasn't memory. It was inside my chest, the sound of my own heartbeat reshaped into steel. I laughed then, softly, because I finally understood. Reeves was never chasing me. He was waiting inside the silence, and I had been walking toward him all along. The scissors lie open on the table. The metal gleams like water. I can see my face split between the two blades, one side alive, the other waiting. I think of the letter. The pattern is not finished, and I know what must come next. Not another body, not another echo, only completion. When the scissors close again, there will be silence, perfect, endless silence. And maybe, finally, Reeves will stop whispering. The morning came without color. The fog pressed against the windows like a memory trying to return. I hadn't slept. The scissors lay closed on the counter, their edge faintly tarnished from disuse. I had begun to fear silence again, though I had once worshipped it. When the bell above the door rang, I didn't look up. It had been weeks since anyone entered the shop. The sound felt almost foreign, a bell tolling from another life. "Good morning," a voice said, calm, deliberate, measured. I looked up and there he was. He didn't wear a uniform, only a dark coat that looked too heavy for the season. His face was clean, unreadable, the kind of face you forget the moment you look away. And yet I knew it instantly. I had seen it before, not in flesh, but in thought. "Inspector Reeves," I said quietly. He smiled. "You know me then." "London knows you," I replied. "It's difficult not to." He glanced around the shop. His eyes lingered on the rolls of fabric, the half-finished coat on the mannequin, the scissors gleaming faintly under the grey light. He moved slowly, with the certainty of someone who already understands the layout of the room before stepping inside. "I used to have a suit made here," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Years ago, before you owned it, I suppose." "Perhaps," I said. "The walls keep their secrets better than men do." He smiled again, not amusement but acknowledgement. "Do they?" He walked toward the counter. Each step was quiet, deliberate. He removed his gloves, placed them neatly beside a small notebook. "I'm told you work late," he said. "That you're precise." I tilted my head. "In tailoring, precision is survival." He nodded. "And in other trades?" "In all of them." He looked at me then, truly looked, and for the first time I understood why he was feared by the men he hunted. His gaze didn't accuse, it studied. He wasn't looking for guilt. He was measuring truth. "Do you read the papers, Mr. Graves?" he asked. "Occasionally." "Then you know what they say about me?" "That you're relentless." "And about him?" I hesitated. "The Scissor Killer." He didn't flinch at the name. "Yes, about him. They say he cuts with purpose," I said softly. Reeves's eyes flicked to the scissors on the table, then back to mine. "That's a curious phrase, isn't it? Cuts with purpose. As if intent could be sharpened." "Perhaps it can," I said. "A dull mind kills without reason. A sharp one chooses where to cut." He considered that. "Do you believe he has a reason?" "I believe everyone does. Even you?" "Especially me." He studied me for a long moment, then opened his notebook. The pages were filled with sketches, not words, but patterns, lines intersecting like threads. "I keep notes," he said. "Not of names, but of shapes. I find patterns where others see chaos." "Then you must be a tailor too." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps. Our trades aren't so different." "Both demand patience," I said, "and precision, and the ability to unmake what others create." The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. The sound of the rain outside felt louder in its absence. He closed the notebook gently. "Tell me," he said, "how do you decide when a garment is finished?" "When it stops speaking," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. "And if it never does?" "Then you listen until it does." He nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on mine. "That's a dangerous philosophy." "I thought you preferred danger." He turned toward the window, hands behind his back. The fog outside was so thick that even the lamplight seemed afraid to enter. "Do you believe," he asked quietly, "that some men are born for silence?" "I believe silence is earned," I said. He turned back. "Earned through what?" "Through understanding." "Of what?" "The sound that lies beneath it." He studied me, his expression unreadable. "You speak like a man who has heard it." "Perhaps I have." He walked back to the counter, resting his fingertips on the edge. "And what does it sound like?" It met his eyes, like peace, like scissors closing. The air between us thickened. Somewhere outside, a horse neighed, startled. Reeves exhaled slowly, as if choosing whether to press further. Instead, he straightened his coat. "London is tired," he said. "The air is heavy with fear. People whisper his name even when they're alone. That sort of silence spreads faster than fire." "Silence isn't a disease," I said. "It's a cure." He gave a small nod, as though noting the answer in some invisible ledger. I asked, "Why are you here, Inspector?" He smiled, faint, restrained. "To order a suit, of course." I didn't return the smile. "You don't strike me as a man who hides behind fabric." "No," he said, "but I like to see how men work with their hands." He took off his coat and placed it neatly over the chair. The gesture was ordinary, polite, yet deliberate. Under the lamplight, I noticed faint stains on his cuffs, not blood but ink, the mark of a man who writes too often and sleeps too little. "What kind of fabric?" I asked. He considered the question longer than necessary. "Something dark," he said at last, "something that doesn't draw attention." I nodded. "That won't be difficult. The city prefers black these days." He smiled again, weary this time. "Yes, it does." As I took his measurements, the silence between us deepened. His heartbeat was steady, his breathing calm. Mine was not. Every brush of the tape against his coat felt like the crossing of a line I couldn't uncross. "You've steady hands," he said. "I have to. I imagine they've been useful in other ways." I met his gaze, "Only in my trade." He didn't argue. He simply let the silence settle again, heavy and watchful. When I finished, I wrote his name in the ledger, Arthur Reeves. The ink bled slightly on the page, spreading like a bruise. He put on his coat, buttoned it carefully, and turned toward the door. "You work quietly, Mr. Graves," he said. "It's the only way to hear what matters." He opened the door, and the fog reached in like a hand. "I'll return in a few days," he said, "when the suit is ready." "I'll be waiting." He paused in the doorway. "I know." The bell rang once more as he left, and the sound lingered long after he was gone. I looked down at the ledger, at his name written there. The ink was still wet. It gleamed faintly in the dim light, and for a moment I thought I saw it pulse, as if the word itself had a heartbeat. 3 days passed, though time had lost its edges. I worked on the suit in silence, each stitch deliberate, each fold measured with the precision of prayer. The fabric was dark, almost black, smooth beneath my fingertips. It reminded me of the river at night, the way it swallowed everything without question. I told myself I was sewing for a customer, but I knew better. Every cut, every thread, every silent decision was a preparation. Reeves would return. He had said it with certainty, and I had believed him. The city seemed to know as well. The fog thickened again, the air damp with the smell of coal and waiting. Each night I heard the faint echo of footsteps outside the shop, measured, patient, deliberate. They always stopped at the door, but never entered. Sometimes I wondered if it was him, other times I hoped it was. He came back at dusk. The bell above the door rang once, a soft chime swallowed quickly by the fog. "Good evening, Mr. Graves," he said. "Inspector," I replied, setting the scissors down. "You're early." I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. He removed his gloves and glanced at the suit on the mannequin. "It's beautiful," he said. "It isn't finished," I answered. He nodded. "Few things ever are." There was no smile this time, no polite pretense. He walked slowly through the room, fingertips brushing the fabric rolls as though feeling for hidden words. "The city's quieter this week," he said. "People are staying home, locking doors, lighting candles for the dead." "Fear is the purest kind of devotion," I said. "It keeps them faithful." "To whom?" "To whatever listens." He looked at me. "And you listen?" "Always." He stood by the counter, eyes fixed on the scissors, resting in their case. "Do you still believe silence is a cure?" he asked. I thought of the river, the fog, the nights that bled into each other. "Yes," I said, "but I think now the disease has learned to speak." Reeves stepped closer. "And what does it say?" "It says my name." He didn't move, didn't blink. "And what name is that?" "The one they gave me." "The Scissor Killer." The words fell softly, not as accusation, but recognition. He said them like a priest reading a confession already written. I didn't deny it. I didn't need to. The silence between us had already confessed everything. He turned away, examining the half-finished suit. "Did you know," he said, "that the first murder I ever investigated was committed by a tailor?" "No," I said. "He killed his wife, said she had betrayed him with a soldier. He used his shears, large ones, for cutting canvas. He didn't mean to, or so he claimed. Said he only wanted to stop the noise." I felt my throat tighten. "And did you believe him?" "I did," Reeves said quietly. "That's how I knew I was suited for this work." He traced the edge of the fabric, the gesture tender, almost reverent. "When I look at what you've made here," he said, "I can't decide if it's a masterpiece or a memorial." "Sometimes they're the same thing," I said. He looked at me again. "And which do you think this is?" "I haven't decided yet." The clock on the wall ticked once, a faint metallic sound that broke the rhythm of our words. Outside, the fog pressed closer against the glass. Reeves walked to the window and drew a circle in the condensation with his fingertip. "The city hides you well," he said. "Too well, perhaps." "It hides everyone," I said. "I just learned how to listen to its language." He nodded slowly. "That's what frightens me. You don't sound like a man who's lost control. You sound like one who's found it." I looked at the scissors. "Control is a kind of mercy." He turned, hands clasped behind his back. "Mercy for whom?" "For the world," I said softly. "It drowns in its own noise. I only give it quiet." Reeves stepped closer until we stood barely a few feet apart. His voice was calm, steady, almost kind. "And who gives you quiet, Mr. Graves?" I had no answer. He looked down at the scissors, then back at me. "I imagine it must be exhausting," he said, "carrying silence in a city that never stops speaking." "It is," I admitted, "but it's the only burden I chose willingly." He exhaled. "You could put it down." "And if I did?" He shrugged slightly. "Perhaps the silence would thank you." I smiled faintly. "Or perhaps it would punish me. Which do you deserve?" I no longer know. The rain began again, soft at first, then steady. The drops streaked the glass like pale threads unraveling from the sky. Reeves moved to the counter and ran a finger along the spine of the ledger. "Your handwriting," he said, "is very neat, precise. You write as you cut. It's a habit. Habits reveal us." "Or conceal us," I said. He nodded. "True, but concealment requires care, and care leaves patterns. I follow patterns." He closed the ledger gently, as though afraid to wake it. "You understand what I'm saying?" "I do." He looked almost sorrowful then, not in pity, but in recognition, the way one craftsman looks at another who has ruined his masterpiece by finishing it too soon. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Neither are you." The bell above the door rang suddenly, a gust of wind, nothing more, and both of us turned. The sound faded quickly, leaving only the rain. Reeves adjusted his coat. "I'll take the suit tomorrow," he said. "It'll be ready." He hesitated at the door, his hand on the latch. "Tell me, Mr. Graves, when you cut the fabric, do you ever feel it resist?" "Always." "And you push harder?" "No," I said. "I wait until it surrenders." Reeves nodded once, the faintest smile touching his lips. "That's what I thought." He opened the door. The fog curled in like breath. As he stepped out, he said without turning, "You've chosen your silence well, but silence, too, leaves echoes." Then he was gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. The fog still moved, alive and restless. I could feel his presence lingering, not as fear but as absence. A space carved perfectly to his shape. On the counter, the scissors gleamed faintly in the lamplight. I reached out and touched the cold steel. The edge was sharper than before. I could feel it hum beneath my fingers, faint and alive, as if it had listened to everything. And in that hum, I heard Reeves' voice, quiet, patient, inevitable. "You can wait as long as you like, Elias. The silence will find you." The fog came earlier that evening, rolling over the city like a tide of ash. It crept through the alleys, over the bridges, across the river, until even the lamps burned dim and uncertain. I watched from the window as it pressed against the glass, soft and patient, as though it had come to fetch me. The suit was finished. It hung on the mannequin, perfect in its silence. Every seam lay smooth, every thread obedient. It was the best thing I had ever made, and I hated it for that. I had sewn it with trembling hands, though not from fear, from recognition. This was not Reeves's suit. It was mine. The scissors lay open on the counter. I had cleaned them until the steel reflected everything, the lamp, the fog, my face. I wondered what Reeves would see in them when he came. Not his reflection, but mine, perhaps, or neither. The bell above the door had been silent for days. Tonight, I knew it would ring again. It was nearly midnight when it did. Once, twice, soft, steady. I didn't turn immediately. I wanted the sound to linger. I wanted to hear it dissolve into the air. When I finally looked, Reeves was standing in the doorway, his coat dusted with fog, his face pale under the weak light. He didn't remove his gloves this time. "Good evening, Mr. Graves," he said. "It's late," I replied. "You shouldn't be out in this weather." "The city doesn't sleep," he said. "Neither do you." I gestured to the mannequin. "Your suit is ready." He approached slowly, his boots silent on the wooden floor. "It's beautiful," he said again, just as before. "It's finished," I said. "Then it's no longer beautiful." He stood before it, studying every line, every shadow. His hand hovered above the fabric, not touching, as though afraid it might bleed. "You've worked hard," he said softly. "It wasn't work," I replied. "It was waiting." He turned to face me. The silence between us thickened, a weight pressing from all sides. "Waiting for what?" "For you." He nodded as though he'd expected the answer. I thought so. We said nothing for a long time. The fog outside pressed closer, dimming the lamplight. I could hear the faint crackle of the fire from the stove, the ticking of the clock, the city's breath beyond the walls. "You knew I would come," Reeves said. "I did." "Why?" "Because you've always been coming." He tilted his head slightly. "And what am I to you, Mr. Graves?" I looked down at the scissors. The other hand. He smiled faintly. "Then we've both been busy." I felt the air shift. He stepped closer, not threatening but certain. "Do you believe in redemption?" he asked. "I believe in patterns. And when the pattern ends, then the fabric tears." "Is that what this is?" he asked quietly. "The end?" I thought of the faces I could no longer name, the blood that had long since turned to memory, the silence that had grown too heavy to bear. I met his eyes. "It has to be." He walked to the counter where the scissors lay gleaming. "They're beautiful," he said, touching them lightly. "Old, balanced." "They belong to my father," I said. "He taught me to cut cleanly." "Did he teach you when to stop?" "No one can teach that." He nodded slowly, then picked them up. The blades caught the light, trembling slightly. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he placed them back down, carefully, as one might lay down a cross. "I used to think killing was chaos," he said, "but I've learned it's the opposite. It's order, a way to make sense of noise." "You understand, then?" "Yes," he said, "too well." He looked around the shop, at the rolls of fabric stacked neatly along the walls, the empty chairs, the ledger half open on the table. "You could have stopped," he said. "I tried." "But the silence?" "It kept calling." He stepped closer, his shadow merging with mine. "You said once that silence is earned," he said. "Do you think you've earned it?" "I don't know." "Then what have you earned?" "Understanding." He nodded, the faintest motion. "Of what?" "That we were never different." For the first time, his composure faltered. His gaze softened, not pity, not horror, but the tired recognition of a man who's seen his reflection too often in dark glass. "I could take you in," he said quietly. "I know." "Would you fight?" "No." "Would you run?" "I've been running toward you my whole life." He looked at me for a long time. "Then tell me why," he said. I wanted to answer, but the words caught in my throat. All I could say was, because silence needs someone to carry it. He understood. I could see it in his eyes. The clock struck midnight. Its chime was dull, almost human. Reeves turned toward the mannequin again, then to the scissors on the table. "Will you finish it?" he asked. "I already have." "No," he said, "not the suit, the pattern." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly, though not from fear. "Perhaps it will finish itself." He nodded once. "Perhaps." He took a slow step backward, as though testing the space between us. "Tell me something, Mr. Graves," he said. "When you cut the first throat, what did you feel?" "Relief," I said honestly. "The kind that only comes when a sound stops." He exhaled. "And now I hear it again." He closed his eyes briefly. "I thought so." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a piece of paper, folded twice. He placed it on the counter beside the scissors. "What is it?" I asked. "Your confession," he said. "I haven't written one." "You did," he said softly. You've been writing it for years. Every cut, every silence, every word you've spoken tonight. I only put it on paper. I looked down. The paper was blank. Empty, I said. He smiled faintly. Not for long. The fog thickened against the windows. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. The air felt still, expectant. You could walk out that door, he said. The river's not far. The city would swallow you again. And you'd let me? He hesitated. I don't know. Then perhaps you shouldn't decide. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world held its breath. Then Reeves spoke, almost gently. You said silence was a cure. It still is. He looked at me, eyes calm and unreadable. Then cure us both. He stepped back, leaving the scissors between us. The lamp's light split along their blades, two mirrored halves of the same glow. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold metal. The sound that followed was barely audible, a whisper, a sigh, the echo of steel closing. Reeves didn't move. He didn't need to. His eyes never left mine. For the first time there was peace. When I opened my eyes, the fog had thinned. The lamp still burned, though faintly. Reeves was gone. The door stood half open, the bell silent. On the counter lay the scissors, closed now, their edge dark. The piece of paper was gone. I walked to the window. Outside, the city was still. No carriages, no footsteps, only the endless hush of rain. It was beautiful. It was unbearable. I turned back to the mannequin. The suit waited perfect and untouched. I realized then what Reeves had meant. The suit wasn't for him. It never had been. It was for me. I put it on slowly, each motion deliberate, ritualistic. The fabric was cold against my skin, heavy with the weight of what it had cost. When I buttoned the last button, I understood the pattern at last. It was never meant to fit another man. It was meant to contain an echo. I stood before the mirror. The reflection was calm, composed, almost serene. The man in the glass looked like someone who had finally remembered his own name. For the first time, the silence didn't frighten me. It welcomed me. I took the scissors from the counter. They were warm again, as if they had been waiting. Outside, the bells began to toll. 1, 2, 3, their sound distant, dissolving into the fog. When the last chime faded, I lifted the blades. And the silence that followed was absolute. They found the shop 3 days later. The door was unlocked. The lamp still burned, its flame trembling like a heartbeat that refused to stop. The air smelled of iron and dust, of rain that had forgotten how to dry. The mannequin stood in the center of the room, dressed in the black suit, perfect, immaculate, untouched. No body was ever found, only the scissors, resting on the counter, closed and clean. Some said the killer had fled. Others swore Reeves had let him go. The newspapers argued for weeks, printing contradictions and theories until the noise drowned itself. The city returned to its rhythm, slow, heavy, and watchful. But I know the truth, because I am still here, not as flesh, not as name, but as sound. At night, when the fog rolls through the alleys and the lamplight flickers, I move through the silence I made. The city still breathes my rhythm, the heartbeat of scissors closing, the whisper of fabric yielding to steel. Reeves walks its streets still, chasing the echo I left behind, though he knows it cannot be caught. We are both patterns now, two threads stitched into the same darkness. Sometimes I hear him stop beneath my old window, his boots soft against the stones. He doesn't speak, he only listens. And when the wind moves just right, I whisper to him through the fog. You were right, Arthur. Silence leaves echoes. The city keeps them well,